we had all this revenue coming in, and then the pandemic hit and Republicans were like, hey, now you got federal dollars coming in. So don't get too crazy with spending it on new programs, because as soon as, maybe the economy retracts or that spending retracts, you're going to find yourself in a pinch. It's budgeting 101. But Democrats didn't listen. Why would they listen? They have full control in Olympia to do what they want, to fund the programs they want. So they just do what they want to do. Now they're going to come into this legislative session $10 to $12 billion short, and they're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. So Governor Inslee, he had sent out a letter last week to all his, through the Office of Financial Management, to all the state agencies, basically saying, hey, you need to do what you can now to cut spending, maybe eliminate some spending that, is on the horizon or hasn't fully manifested that you planned for. Don't plan for it now. In addition to that, this from the Office of Financial Management. So the governor's office and its affiliates, they called it. So basically the agencies the governor's office controls, they're going to freeze hiring for most positions, freeze all new contracts that are not already pre-approved. All existing subscriptions will be reviewed for utilization, freeze all non-essential travel, blah, 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 freeze all new equipment purchases. That's like the bare minimum, right? But that stuff is not going to add up to $10 to $12 billion in savings. So now we're starting to see what some of these state agencies are proposing. Now, first of all, the idea that they're going to cut $10 to $12 billion in spending, that Democrats are going to do that, is ridiculous. What are they going to do? We talked about on the show last week. They're going to look for new revenue, which means new taxes. That is going to be primarily how they seek to fill the budget deficit, because they haven't learned their lesson. They have a spending problem. It's an addiction. It's like a stay-at-home wife, trophy wife, who's got her husband's credit card and is just out at Home Goods every day. I say Home Goods because that's what I would do if I were a trophy wife. I'd be at Home Goods every day too. But that's how Democrats treat our state budget. They're not going to stop spending because it's an addiction that they have, and they're shoveling money out to their cronies and allies. So they're just going to look for more money to come in so they don't have to cut anything. But in the meantime, they're at least going to, let's throw taxpayers a bone. Like, let's find a few $1 million here and there. Like, cutting stuff that's not even going to come close to putting a dent in the deficit that we face. So in the office of Governor Jay Inslee, he's released some proposed cuts for fiscal year 2025 and the 2025-2027 budget. And keep in mind, he's only going to be the governor for like another month and a half. So what he is proposing cutting isn't necessarily going to be what Bob Ferguson would cut. And what he's cutting, this is just for his office, not for like state government as a whole. Like, he's talking about like a few $1 million. Like, this is really going to make a difference at the end of the day. But some of this stuff I'm in favor of. And it also shows you how frivolous the spending was that got us into this situation. Like, for instance, he's cutting part of his Office of Equity. Yeah, that shouldn't even exist. So I'm glad that you're making cuts to it. Also, the community survey for the LGBTQ Commission. Yeah, that has no place in state government, especially in a very progressive state where LGBTQ people are just fine. So yeah, some of those things, great. That's what I would have gone in there and slashed too. But then there are some things that really sent our little, our hackles, is that what you call them? Alarm bells. Yeah, that really rang our alarm bells. So one of them, he is going to be cutting entirely Results WA. Results WA. That's a proposal from Governor Inslee to cut Results WA. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, it should, because we've talked about Results WA here on the show. Results Washington is a website that exists because of Governor Jay Inslee. He came into office and basically said that when it comes to some of the things that he wanted to push, like his climate policies, he was going to create a website that would track progress. And if you go to the website, Results Washington, it has some of like the goals that the governor's put forth and where they are in terms of fulfilling those goals. And so in principle, I think that sounds like a very good thing. Like, yeah, the governor's promising all these things. He's taxing us to achieve all these things. So let's have a website that was supposed to be nonpartisan, just a absolutely black and white facts and figures. Is Governor Jay Inslee and his administration and state government achieving some of these lofty climate goals that they've set forth? Except the reason we talked about this, and it was actually on the show about a year ago, is because King 5 News had done this investigation into Governor Inslee's climate agenda and found out that he's not meeting any of his goals. Like, in fact, there are aspects of his climate agenda that are worse today than they were when he took office as the climate governor. Like, recycling is down, for instance. Carbon emissions are up. And what King 5 News pointed out in its reporting a year ago is that, in theory, Washingtonians wouldn't have had to wait for King 5 News to do this reporting. They could have gone to Results Washington and saw that for themselves, that, hey, things aren't going well, except the government was manipulating Results Washington, so it did not show these failures. Again, this from King 5 News a year ago. When Inslee came into office 10 years ago, he created via executive order a state agency, Results Washington, to set, track, measure, and publicize state goals, such as environmental targets. It was part of the state's mission to adopt lean management principles through a strategy of performance management and continuous state government improvement. Inslee said at the time, holding ourselves accountable for results to the citizens of Washington isn't politically expedient. It is clearly the right thing to do. But over the years, Results Washington has watered down the results. The agency has scrubbed most of the environmental goals and measurements from its website. Instead, it now features pages of state reports, links to federal information, graphs, maps, and spreadsheets. So Results Washington was rendered completely useless because Governor Inslee came into office saying he wanted to be accountable for these goals, but when he set goals that were completely unrealistic, yet they were taking hundreds of millions of dollars in your tax revenue and your money to not achieve these things, someone directed Results Washington, which was supposed to be nonpartisan, facts and figures, hey, just bury those results. You know, the governor can't have a website that's run by the state showing that he's not achieving any of these climate goals. So just bury the results. Well, now instead of just bury the results deep in that website and all these graphs and links and pages, they're just going to get rid of the website entirely. Yeah, that's one of the ways Governor Inslee is proposing that they save money in a budget deficit is just to do away with the website that he said he wanted to create when he took office to hold themselves accountable for the results to the citizens of Washington state. And he's recommending that ahead of a new governor taking office who is one of, if not the least transparent politicians in the state. So Lord only knows that Bob Ferguson doesn't want Results Washington. He doesn't want a website that tracks whether he's making good on the promises that he made on the campaign trail, because we know that the promises he made on the campaign trail were utter bullshit. Came out of nowhere. Oh, we're going to hire more police officers. That's never going to happen. No police officers want to work for you, and now you're not going to have the money, the $100 million you promised voters that you were going to dedicate toward hiring new police officers. You're not going to have that because now we have a $10 to $12 billion budget deficit. So God forbid that Bob Ferguson comes into office and there's a state agency, Results Washington, that's going to track whether he's actually making good on his promises. He can't have that. He hates transparency. So Jay Inslee's doing him a favor by saying, we're in a budget deficit. What's one of the first things to go? The website that's going to track whether Bob Ferguson is doing what he's supposed to be doing. You can't make this stuff up. It's delicious. It's horrifying, but it's also delicious. All right. A couple of the other cuts that we saw that were being flagged from other agencies. Again, they were asked to put forward some of their suggestions and ways that they could quickly and easily save some money before lawmakers meet in January and have to really dive deep and make some hard cuts. Let's see. Department of Commerce. What is the Department of Commerce going to cut? Okay, they got a little things here, reducing training here, reduce ethnic media contracts. Okay, that sounds like a good thing to go, like all on board. It also shows how, preventing farm worker sexual harassment. I guess that's a big enough thing to have warranted hundreds of thousands of dollars in spending. Let's see, going down the list. Here's an interesting one, number 6. Unspent CCA funds, Washington Families Clean Energy Credit. Wait a second. So you're going to find $3.3 million in savings by cutting the Washington Families Clean Energy Credits? Weren't those the energy credits that you doled out right before the election to not bribe voters, to help families that were struggling to pay their energy bills because of the Climate Commitment Act? Here's Governor Jay Inslee announcing that very, very, very important program earlier this year.
We're putting several millions of dollars to help people get a check so that they can help you pay your utility bills. It's a right thing to do for hardworking Washingtonians.
It's the right thing to do for hardworking Washingtonians to bribe them with their own money. Help them with their energy bills. So why are you getting rid of it? If that's the right thing to do for hardworking Washingtonians, so much so that you had multiple press conferences talking about the importance of these energy credits to hardworking Washingtonians, why are you getting rid of it? And besides, if you get rid of it now, right after the election, after people accused you of using it as a bribe to stop the repeal of the Climate Commitment Act, won't that just prove the point that it was a bribe? I mean, Governor Inslee denied that it was a bribe all along.
Are you trying to bribe voters with this?
No, they're trying to take away $200 from these families. Who wants to take away $200 credit from a family to help them with their costs of these low-income folks? That's reprehensible. You know what else? It's weird.
Who would want to take away these energy credits from these families? Who would want to do that? It's reprehensible. It's weird. So who would do that? Oh, that's right. Governor Jay Inslee and his Department of Commerce would do that after the election. They're not going to take that $3.3 million and continue to give energy credits to energy customers whose bills haven't gone down. No, they're just going to scrub that entirely because it was, of course, all along just a bribe to voters ahead of the election. And now that the election's over, now that they got the result they wanted, they're going to continue to take your money at the gas pump and via higher energy bills. They're going to continue to do that at higher and higher rates, but they're not going to give that money back to you now. Why would they? Like you did what they wanted you to do. You kept the Climate Commitment Act, so there's no need to continue to bribe you with your own money via $200 energy credits. These people are shameless, and they're shameless because the media allows them to be shameless, 100%. Let's see. Let's check in on the Department of Social and Health Services, shall we? What are some ways that they're going to try to cut their budget? Oh, yes. They're going to reduce spending at the Special Commitment Center on McNeil Island. Ah, yes. It's the very first place I would cut spending. The island where we house the worst of the worst sex offenders, the sexually violent predators who are at such a high propensity to reoffend that we take them and we put them on an island that they cannot get off of. It's our very own Alcatraz. Yeah, they're going to propose, closing a unit and defunding a unit that was closed a few years ago. So, hey, it was closed a few years ago. Why are we still having staff to deal with that unit if we don't have anyone in it? So that'll save us $1.483 million. Also, the Redwood unit is being run at half capacity, but positions were not reduced to reflect the reduced bed capacity. So you're telling me that you had a unit that was at half capacity, yet staffing was at full capacity? Wow, that sounds wasteful. So yeah, I'm totally in favor of that staff reduction. That'll save you about $930,000. But here's what that shows. Like, I'm totally in agreement with those reductions if you have staff that aren't doing anything on the island. Yeah, if you've got a unit that isn't being used, if you got beds that aren't being filled, we don't need staff for that, right? That makes sense. But this speaks to something that we've discussed for the last year, that Bob Ferguson was 100% lying when he said on the campaign trail that he was out there keeping sex offenders on McNeil Island, protecting us from these sex offenders. We know that the reason they can reduce spending on McNeil Island is because the state is letting these sex offenders off McNeil Island at record rates. The Seattle Times did a story on it. Washington confined hundreds for sexual violence. Then it quietly began releasing them. It talked about the fact that 12 years ago, right before Bob Ferguson took office as Attorney General, they were releasing maybe one a year from McNeil Island, maybe one. And then Bob Ferguson took office as Attorney General, which is tasked with either keeping or fighting to keep or not fighting to keep these sexually violent predators on the island. And it went from maybe one being released into communities every year to dozens. Dozens. So yeah, of course they can cut spending to McNeil Island because we've let all the sexually violent predators, we've released them into communities, into less secure facilities in a neighborhood near you. And then Bob Ferguson, again on the campaign trail, acted like it never happened. In fact, he had a whole section on his campaign website. Standing up for survivors of violent crime, Bob kept nearly 100 of the most violent sex predators out of our communities. Except, of course, they didn't mention all the ones that they'd released into our communities. So yeah, no surprise that the Department of Social and Health Services can save some money on McNeil Island because people like Bob Ferguson, who now got a promotion, didn't stand in the way of releasing sexually violent predators from McNeil Island. So yeah, there's some cost savings there. Not the area, I will tell you, not the area that I want there to be cost savings in the state of Washington, is confining the worst of the worst sex offenders. We don't have fewer violent sex offenders. It's not like there's been some giant societal shift where all of a sudden there aren't horrible, dangerous perverts out there. No, they're still out there. It's just our state doesn't care to put them on an island anymore. Our state doesn't even really care to put them in prison. Our state is going to put them in less secure facilities. What do they call those? LRAs? Residential? I don't remember what that stands for. Less restrictive alternatives. Mm-hmm. Less restrictive alternatives. Right down the street from bus stops. Yeah, like they tried to do in Enumclaw. Like they tried to do in Tenino. Totally under the radar, not letting communities know what was going on. Just take, Joe pedophile off McNeil Island, who had to go there because even after his prison sentence, because he was deemed irredeemable. And Bob Ferguson's office just opened the door, stood out of the way, and sent them to a community near you so they could live in a house that didn't even have added security down the street from a bus stop where kids gather in the morning. It's just wild stuff. So cost savings there. Great. Love it. Where they are going to find cost savings, where they are going to make budget cuts, tells you everything you need to know about the people in power. Like, yeah, I see some recommended budget cuts here that are great. Anything that says equity, gone. That's it should be gone. Should never have existed to begin with. So hopefully this is an opportunity to rid the state of some of the DEI nonsense. But at the same time, you look at these other things like eliminating the really important energy credits for families that are struggling to pay their energy bills. We could do that before the election, but after the election, that's not such a priority of ours.